Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's tale begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. Over spring break in 2019, I went on a school trip to the United Kingdom. Our itinerary included London and Edinburgh, Scotland. For most of us, it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Edinburgh, in particular, stood out from the moment we arrived. The city feels old in a way that's hard to describe if you haven't been there. The streets are narrow, the buildings loom over you, and there's a constant sense that you're walking through layers of history stacked on top of each other. While we were in Scotland, our group signed up for a ghost tour called the Mercat Tour. At the time, it sounded fun more than anything else. We were teenagers, excited by the idea of haunted places, ghosts, and scary stories. None of us really expected anything serious to happen. We joked about seeing ghosts, laughed about it, and treated it like entertainment. The tour began above ground, right in the heart of Edinburgh. The guide was charismatic and clearly loved history. He didn't start with ghosts right away. Instead, he walked us through the darker realities of life in old Edinburgh. He explained how the city was once incredibly overcrowded, how people lived stacked on top of each other in tall tenement buildings, and how sanitation was almost non-existent. He pointed out the dips in the old brick roads and explained that those grooves existed so human waste could flow downhill after people dumped it straight out of their windows. It was disgusting, but fascinating. He also talked about public punishments and executions, how torture was once a form of entertainment, something people gathered to watch the way we might attend a show today. As unsettling as it was, I found it incredibly interesting. It felt raw and honest, not romanticized. Edinburgh's history wasn't just old, it was brutal. Eventually, the guide brought us to a stack of old apartments and shops. He stopped and told us we were about to go underground. That was the moment when the tone shifted. The laughter quieted down. The excitement became more nervous. We were about to enter a place that wasn't just old, but sealed off from the world for centuries. The tour company we were with is the only one that has access to the Blair Street underground vaults, which are considered one of the most haunted places, not just in Scotland, but in all of Europe. Before we went down, the guide explained the history of the vaults in detail. In 1788, a massive bridge was built in Edinburgh. It was supported by 19 huge stone columns. Because the city was already crowded and space was precious, people didn't waste what was underneath the bridge. Instead, they built walls between the columns, creating dozens of underground rooms and vaults. These rooms were dark, damp, and poorly ventilated. Over time, they became home to the poorest and most desperate people in the city. The vaults were used for gambling dens, illegal businesses, mob activity, prostitution, and all kinds of crime. Disease spread quickly in those conditions. People lived and died down there, often forgotten by the rest of the city. Eventually, the police decided the vaults were too dangerous to exist. They forced everyone out and filled the rooms with gravel, sealing them away so they could never be used again. For nearly 200 years, the vaults were forgotten. Then, in the 1980s, a family who owned a shop near the bridge began renovating their building. During the work, they discovered a staircase buried under rubble. That staircase led down into gravel-filled rooms. What they found shocked historians. The Blair Street underground vaults had been preserved, hidden away beneath the city. Over the next several years, the gravel was carefully removed, and the rooms were reopened. Initially, the focus was purely historical. But as time went on, strange things began to happen. Visitors reported feeling sudden drops in temperature, pressure on their chests, unexplained sounds, and seeing figures that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The tour company began keeping a detailed logbook. They recorded when people experienced something, exactly where it happened, and what they saw or heard. Over time, patterns started to emerge. Certain rooms appeared again and again. Certain descriptions repeated themselves, even from people who had never met or spoken to each other. By the day we visited, that book had grown thick with entries. That day, my name was added to it. Our school group was split into two smaller groups for the tour. We did the above-ground portion first. Then it was time to go underground. The entrance was through a narrow stone stairwell. We descended a spiral staircase, going down 2 full flights. Each flight had a small landing. One landing, in particular, stood out to me even before anything happened. It was small, maybe 3 feet by 5 feet. Behind it was a narrow, empty hallway, about 3 feet wide and roughly 9 feet long. At the end of that hallway was a wooden door. Above the door was a gap, about a foot high, between the top of the door and the stone frame. The darkness beyond that gap seemed thicker somehow. I noticed it immediately, even though I had no idea why it would matter later. At the bottom of the stairs, we entered a large room. It was dimly lit with soft yellow lighting that barely reached the corners. The stone walls were rough and damp. The air felt heavy, like it had been trapped there for centuries. As we walked through the rooms, the guide told us stories of what had happened in each one, who lived there, who died there, what people reported seeing. As skeptical as I thought I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like awareness, like being watched without seeing anyone watching. Several people in our group mentioned feeling uneasy, but no one wanted to be the first to admit being scared. Then we entered one particular room. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the temperature drop sharply, at least 10 degrees. The air felt heavier and more humid. My skin prickled instantly. The guide told us this was considered the most haunted room in the vaults. He didn't need to convince us. We could feel the difference immediately. When we stepped back out, the temperature changed again, just as suddenly. It was impossible not to notice. The tour began to wrap up after that. We started heading back toward the stairs. I remember feeling relief as we left the deeper rooms behind. I thought the unsettling part was over. I thought we were safe now. As we climbed the spiral staircase, something made me turn around. I don't know why I did. It wasn't a sound or a voice. It was just a sudden, overwhelming urge to look back toward that door on the landing, the one with the narrow hallway and the gap above it. As I turned, I stared at the doorway. For the first couple of seconds, there was nothing. Then, out of absolutely nothing, a man appeared. He didn't fade in slowly. He didn't step forward. He was just suddenly there, standing behind the door, visible through the gap above it. He appeared solid, real. He was tall and plump, with a round face. His cheeks were full, almost cheerful, like something you'd expect to see on a friendly old man. He had a light brown mustache and a short goatee. But his eyes were wrong. The whites of his eyes looked normal, but his pupils and irises were completely black. Not dark brown, not shadowed. Black, like holes cut into his face, and they weren't empty. They reflected light. There was a shine to them, and they were locked directly onto me. I stared at him for about 7 seconds. The first 2 seconds. My brain refused to accept what I was seeing. I thought my eyes were adjusting to the darkness. I thought it was my imagination. Then the reality of it hit me all at once. My body went completely rigid. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone had pressed down on it. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me. That look is something I will never forget. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It wasn't threatening in a dramatic way. It felt aware. Like he knew I could see him. Like this moment was intentional. Suddenly, survival instinct took over. I turned and sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't care about the group. I didn't care about looking ridiculous. I ran until my legs burned. When I reached the top, I ran down the hallway where the rest of the group had gathered and collapsed onto the floor. I was hyperventilating. My hands were shaking. Tears filled my eyes without me trying to cry. I couldn't get words out at first. Someone asked what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. I looked down at my smartwatch. My resting heart rate was usually around 100 beats per minute. In seconds, it had spiked to 149. My body was reacting as if I had just escaped something dangerous. Eventually, I managed to explain what I saw. Some people laughed nervously. Some looked uncomfortable. The guide didn't laugh. He went very quiet and asked me exactly where I saw him. When I pointed to the landing and described the doorway, he nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised. Later, I learned that multiple people had reported seeing a man in that exact spot. Tall, plump, facial hair, black eyes. My experience was recorded in the logbook. To this day, remembering it makes me uneasy. I don't tell this story to scare people. I don't tell it to convince anyone of anything. I tell it because it happened, and it changed the way I think about places, history, and the things that might linger where suffering once existed. I promise you, this is a true story. I still get nervous when I think about that moment, about those eyes, about how real he looked, about how silent he was, and about the fact that for 7 seconds, I was looking at something that should not have been there, in one of the most haunted places in Europe. This is one of those stories that sounds almost unreal when you first hear it. The kind of thing you expect to see in a documentary or a true crime podcast, not connected to someone you know. But this wasn't distant. It wasn't abstract. It was close enough to feel personal. Close enough that it made everyone who heard it stop and think about how easily something normal can turn into something deadly. A friend of mine told me this story about her cousin. At the time, her cousin was just living her life like any other young woman. She was using Tinder, the same way millions of people do. Swiping, chatting, matching, trying to meet someone interesting. Nothing about that felt dangerous to her. It was normal. It was modern dating. People do it every day and walk away with awkward dates, funny stories, or sometimes real connections. She matched with a guy. Their conversations were easy at first. They joked, talked about everyday things, shared interests. There were no obvious red flags in the beginning. He seemed normal, friendly, interesting enough to agree to meet in person. When he suggested meeting at his apartment, she didn't think much of it. They'd been talking long enough that it felt safe, or at least safe enough. Plenty of people go to someone's place on a first date. It's not unusual. So she went. When she arrived, everything seemed fine. The apartment looked normal. Clean, lived in. Nothing that immediately made her feel uneasy. They talked, laughed, got to know each other better. For a while, the date was going well. They were hitting it off, just like they had online. If you had walked in at that moment, you would have seen two people on what looked like a perfectly ordinary date. But as time passed, something started to shift. She couldn't point to one specific moment where things went wrong. It was more subtle than that. A feeling, a change in the atmosphere. His tone shifted slightly. The way he spoke became heavier, less casual. He started steering the conversation toward darker topics. He began talking about death. At first, she tried to brush it off. Some people are into dark humor. Some people like philosophical conversations about life and mortality. She told herself she might be overthinking it. But the more he talked, the more uncomfortable she became. This wasn't casual or abstract. There was something about the way he spoke, something intense and unsettling, like he wasn't just talking about death as a concept, but as something personal, something close. Her body reacted before her mind fully caught up. Her stomach tightened. Her chest felt heavy. That instinctive alarm went off, the one people sometimes ignore because they don't want to seem rude or dramatic. But she couldn't ignore it. The feeling grew stronger with every minute that passed. She no longer felt relaxed. She no longer felt safe. She knew she needed to leave. But leaving isn't always easy, especially when you're inside someone else's space. You start thinking about how to do it without escalating the situation. You don't want to offend. You don't want to cause a scene. You don't want to make someone angry when you're alone with them. So she made an excuse. She told him she needed to use the bathroom. He let her go without question. The moment she closed the bathroom door behind her, everything shifted. The space felt small, confined. Her heart was racing. Her hands were shaking. She knew she didn't have much time. She didn't know what would happen when she came back out, but every instinct she had told her it wouldn't be good. She pulled out her phone and called the police. She spoke quietly, urgently, explaining where she was and that she felt unsafe. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't exaggerate. She simply trusted her fear and acted on it. She stayed in the bathroom, locked inside, waiting. Every sound outside the door felt amplified. Every second felt too long. When the police arrived, everything unfolded quickly. They knocked. They entered the apartment. What they found confirmed that her fear had been absolutely justified. The furniture and the floor were covered in plastic. Not partially, not carelessly, laid out deliberately, like preparation. In the kitchen, there were different saws laid out, not tools tucked away in a drawer, not something you could easily explain away. They were out in the open, ready to be used. There was no misunderstanding. There was no innocent explanation. When the police questioned him, he confessed. He admitted that he had been planning to kill her. He admitted that he was going to do it after she came out of the bathroom. He admitted that he intended to cut her body into pieces. Those words alone are enough to make your blood run cold. The idea that someone can sit across from you, laugh with you, talk with you, while actively planning your death is terrifying in a way that's hard to put into words. It strips away the illusion that danger always looks dangerous. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks like a normal apartment, a normal guy, a normal date. The only reason she survived is because she listened to her instincts. She didn't wait to be polite. She didn't wait for proof. She didn't second-guess herself long enough to talk herself out of it. She acted when something felt wrong, even though she couldn't fully explain why in that moment. Afterward, the reality of how close she had come to dying hit her all at once. The shock didn't end when she left the apartment. It followed her. The thought that she had been sitting in a space designed for her murder, talking to someone who fully intended to kill her, is something that never really leaves you. It changes how you see people. It changes how you see dating. It changes how you trust. For everyone who heard the story, it was a wake-up call, not in a dramatic, paranoid way, but in a sobering one. It reminded us that fear isn't always irrational, that gut feelings exist for a reason, that sometimes discomfort is your brain picking up on details you haven't consciously processed yet. What makes this story especially chilling is how easily it could have gone another way. If she hadn't gone to the bathroom, if she hadn't trusted herself, if she had decided she was overreacting, if she had ignored that voice telling her something was wrong, she would not be here. The man didn't snap suddenly. He didn't act in a moment of rage. He planned it. Carefully, calmly. He set up the space. He prepared tools. He waited for the right moment. That level of intent is horrifying because it means there was nothing she could have said or done to change his mind once she was there. The danger was already decided. That's what makes the story so disturbing. Not just the violence he planned, but the calm normalcy surrounding it. The fact that it began like any other date. The fact that there were no obvious warning signs until it was almost too late. It's easy to say from the outside that people should be more careful, that they shouldn't go to strangers' homes, that they should know better. But fear doesn't always announce itself in obvious ways, and danger doesn't always look the way we expect it to. This could have happened to anyone. What saved her wasn't luck alone. It was awareness. It was listening to her body. It was acting without waiting for permission or validation. The story still circulates among friends as a warning, not to scare people into isolation, but to remind them that their instincts matter, that discomfort is not something to ignore, that being polite is never more important than being alive. Even now, thinking about it leaves a tight feeling in my chest. The image of plastic on the furniture, the saws in the kitchen, the calm confession. It's the kind of story that sticks with you, not because it's sensational, but because it's real. A normal app, a normal date, a normal evening, and behind it all, a plan that almost ended in murder. The fact that she's alive is a testament to how powerful intuition can be when you trust it. And the fact that this happened at all is a reminder of how close danger can be, even in situations that feel ordinary. That's what makes it truly terrifying. This happened last year, in April, when we went on a trip to Baguio in the Philippines. Even now, when I think about it, the memory still sits heavy in my chest. It's one of those experiences that doesn't explode into terror right away, but slowly creeps back into your thoughts when you least expect it. The more you replay it, the less sense it makes. Baguio already feels different from most places. The air is colder, the fog rolls in without warning, and everything feels quieter, almost muffled, like the city is holding its breath. On that particular day, the fog was thick, the kind that wraps around buildings and swallows them halfway, making everything look older than it really is. Our group decided to visit a hotel that was known locally for being haunted. The hotel used to be a church during World War II. Back then, it sheltered nuns, priests, and civilians trying to survive the chaos of war. According to stories, it held countless deaths, bombings, executions, even beheadings of priests. Whether every detail was true or not, the history alone was heavy enough to make the place feel unsettling. The building itself looked worn down, like it carried the weight of everything that had happened inside it. My best friend, Pauline, who everyone calls Pau, was with me, along with a group of our other friends. At first, we didn't take it seriously at all. We joked around as soon as we arrived. Pa and I screamed dramatically, laughed loudly, and acted brave as we walked around the area. It felt like a challenge, like we were daring the place to scare us. We joked about ghosts, souls, and spirits, acting like nothing could touch us. But even while laughing, there was something in the air that didn't quite sit right. The fog made it hard to see clearly, especially around the upper floors of the building. The silence between our laughter felt too deep, like it swallowed sound instead of echoing it. Still, we kept going, feeding off each other's energy, pretending the chill creeping up our backs was just from the cold weather. Eventually, we were about to leave. Everyone started heading toward the van, but Pao and I realized we needed to pee. We split from the group quickly, assuming it would only take a minute. When we were done, the others were already walking ahead, so we stayed behind near the van to wait for them. We stood there together, side by side, facing the building. The fog was still thick, especially around the second floor. The windows looked dark, empty, but somehow not lifeless. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to joke again. Maybe it was nervous energy. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the building felt like it was watching us. I laughed and said, "Haha, don't look around the second floor windows. There are countless souls there." Pao laughed back immediately and said, "As if." Even after saying it, we both looked up anyway. We stared at the second floor windows longer than we should have. Neither of us said anything, but I could feel the mood shift. The laughter faded. The air felt colder. I felt chills run down my arms, not the kind that come from temperature, but the kind that make your stomach tighten. Still, nothing happened. No movement, no sound. Just fog and dark windows. Eventually, our friends returned, and we all got into the van to head back to where we were staying. The van was loud with conversation at first. People were joking, talking about food, laughing about how nothing scary even happened. I sat beside Pao, trying to shake off the weird feeling lingering in my chest. Then I remembered something. A few minutes earlier, while we were still waiting outside, I had received a voice message from Pao. At least, that's what my phone said. I turned to her and casually asked, "Hey, what was that voice message you sent me earlier?" She looked confused. "What voice message?" I laughed, thinking she was messing with me. Pa jokes around a lot, and I assumed she was pretending not to remember. I told her, "Stop it. You literally sent it just now." She shook her head and said she didn't. So I pulled out my phone. I opened our chat and played the voice message. As soon as it started, my smile disappeared. There was a crackling sound throughout the recording, almost like static, heavy enough to partially cover our voices. But underneath it, clear enough to understand, were our words. My voice said, "Ha ha ha, don't look around the second floor windows. There are countless souls there." Then Pa's voice replied, "As if." The van went quiet around us, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on Pao. The color drained from her face instantly. Her eyes filled with tears before I could even say anything. She started crying, not laughing, not nervous giggling, crying. She grabbed my arm and said, "I wasn't even holding my phone at that time. It was in my bag." The way she said it wasn't dramatic. It was panicked, real. Her voice shook, and she looked genuinely terrified. I asked her again, thinking maybe she was forgetting or misremembering. She swore she hadn't touched her phone. She said she didn't take it out. She said she didn't record anything, and I believed her. Pa isn't the type to pull a joke like that, especially not one that would make her cry like that. Her reaction wasn't fake. It was immediate and raw. Seeing her break down made my own chest tighten, and before I realized it, I was crying too. The van kept moving, carrying us away from the hotel, but the fear came with us. We didn't scream. We didn't shout. We just cried quietly, holding on to each other, trying to process what had just happened. The others in the van noticed something was wrong and asked, "What happened?" We explained, showed them the voice message, and told them what Pao said. Most of them brushed it off. Some said it was probably a coincidence. Others joked that maybe Pao recorded it by accident. A few laughed nervously and said phones glitch all the time. No one really believed us. And maybe that was easier for them. But what bothered me wasn't just the recording itself. It was everything around it. Pao and I had never chatted online before this trip. Our inbox wasn't active. To find our conversation, I would have had to scroll all the way down. How did my phone even open our chat? How did it select her specifically? How did it start recording without anyone touching it? And the timing. That's what haunts me the most. The recording didn't start after I spoke. It started a second before I even said anything about the souls. As if something already knew what was about to be said. As if it was waiting. I replayed the message over and over afterward, trying to find logic in it, trying to convince myself it was just a glitch. But no matter how many explanations I considered, none of them fully made sense. Phones don't usually unlock themselves, open the exact right chat, start recording, and capture a perfectly timed conversation without any input, especially not in a place like that. That night, when we got back to where we were staying, Pao barely spoke. She stayed close to me the entire time. Neither of us slept well. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow felt deeper. I kept thinking about the second-floor windows, about the fog, about how casually I had joked about souls without really believing in them. Now, a year later, it still bothers me. I don't claim to know what happened. I don't say it was a ghost for sure. I don't say it was something supernatural with complete confidence. But I also can't say it was nothing. There are too many small details that don't line up neatly enough to ignore. What stays with me the most is how innocent it felt at first. Just laughter, just jokes, just friends teasing fear. And then suddenly, something crossed the line, quietly, without drama, without warning. That voice message exists. I heard it. Pao heard it. It captured a moment that shouldn't have been captured. And no matter how many times people tell me it was coincidence, my mind keeps going back to the same questions. How did it know? How did it start recording at exactly the right moment? And why did it feel like we weren't alone anymore, even after we left? That hotel is far behind us now, but the memory isn't. It still gives me chills. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I heard. Because of what was recorded. Because of the feeling that something listened. And maybe still is. When my dad and his twin brother were 3 years old, they were outside playing in the yard like toddlers do. There was nothing unusual about the day, no warning signs, no sense that anything bad was about to happen. They were just two little boys, identical in the way only twins can be at that age, running around together, sharing toys, laughing, existing in that carefree bubble children live in before they understand danger. Back then, milk delivery was a regular thing. The milkman would drive his truck through neighborhoods, stopping at houses to drop off bottles. On that day, he pulled up to their house and got out to make his delivery. At some point, without realizing it, he left the gate to the yard open. It wasn't negligence in the way people imagine when they look back with hindsight. It was a simple, human mistake. The kind of thing that happens every day and usually means nothing. While the adults were occupied and the milkman was doing his job, the twins kept playing. At some point, their ball rolled out of the yard and under the delivery truck. To a 3-year-old, this wasn't a dangerous situation. It was just a ball, something familiar, something to retrieve. My dad's twin brother went after it, crawling or toddling underneath the truck, focused only on getting his toy back. He had no understanding of how dangerous that space was, no way to predict what was about to happen. The milkman finished the delivery and got back into the truck. He didn't know a child was underneath it. He started the engine and began to pull away. In a matter of seconds, everything changed. The truck ran over my dad's twin brother and killed him. There's no gentle way to say that, no wording that makes it easier. A 3-year-old child died instantly because of a chain of small, unintentional events lining up in the worst possible way. No one meant for it to happen. No one could have imagined it would. And yet it did. The aftermath was chaos, shock, and horror for everyone involved. For the milkman, the realization of what had happened must have been unbearable. To go to work expecting an ordinary day and end it having accidentally killed a child is the kind of guilt that never leaves a person. Even though it was an accident, even though there was no malice or intent, that weight doesn't go away. It becomes part of you. For the family, the loss was incomprehensible. But what makes this story even more haunting is what happened immediately after. My dad and his brother were identical twins. At 3 years old, they were indistinguishable in a way that went beyond appearance. Their voices, their mannerisms, their understanding of the world all blurred together. In the shock and confusion following the accident, there was a horrifying delay before anyone could even determine which twin had been killed. People kept asking my dad questions. They would ask him, "Are you Bob?" He would say yes. They would ask him, "Are you Steve?" He would say yes. He wasn't lying. He wasn't being evasive. He simply didn't understand what they were asking or why it mattered. At that age, names were interchangeable labels, not fixed identities. To him, he was both. He had always been both. He shared everything with his twin, including identity itself. For a while, no one could tell which child was gone. That detail is almost unbearable to think about. Not just losing a child, but standing in the aftermath and not even being able to name which one you've lost. The confusion, the denial, the desperate hope that maybe this was all some kind of mistake, that maybe the wrong child was being accounted for, that maybe, somehow, both could still exist. Eventually, they figured it out. Eventually, the truth settled into place. But by then, the damage was already done in a way that can't be undone. My dad grew up without his twin. That alone would shape anyone's life. Twins often describe a bond that feels deeper than friendship, deeper than siblinghood. It's a shared existence, a constant presence. For my dad, that presence was suddenly gone before he was old enough to understand what death meant. Instead of memories, he grew up with an absence. Instead of grief in the way adults experience it, he carried something quieter and more complex, a missing half, a shadow of someone who should have been there, a life that continued but not in the way it was meant to. The family carried that loss too. Every milestone after that came with an invisible question attached to it. What would it have been like if both boys had been there? What kind of person would his twin have grown into? Would they have stayed close? Would they have drifted apart? Would they have shared careers, jokes, inside references no one else could understand? Those questions never have answers. What happened that day wasn't a haunting in the supernatural sense. There were no strange sounds or unexplained sights. but it's haunted in a much deeper way. It's the kind of story that lives on in family memory, retold carefully, quietly, with a weight behind every word. It's haunted by what-ifs, by the knowledge that a gate left open for just a moment can change everything, by the realization that childhood innocence doesn't protect you from tragedy, by the fact that identity itself can become blurred in the face of sudden loss. Even now, thinking about a 3-year-old being asked who he is in the aftermath of his twin's death is heartbreaking in a way that's hard to articulate. It speaks to how unprepared we are, as humans, to deal with the sudden, irreversible nature of death, especially when it involves children, especially when it happens so fast that there's no time to say goodbye. My dad survived, but surviving doesn't mean untouched. He lived the rest of his life carrying the echo of someone who never got the chance to grow up. A brother who existed, mattered, and was loved, even if his time was heartbreakingly short. For the family, that day became a dividing line. Life before the accident. Life after it. Nothing ever fully returned to what it was meant to be because something irreplaceable was gone. It's one of those stories that doesn't need embellishment. The facts alone are enough. A yard, a ball, a truck, a moment, and a loss so profound that it still resonates decades later. There's no lesson that makes it easier, no moral that ties it up neatly, just the stark reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly it can be taken, and how the consequences of one brief moment can ripple outward for generations. That's what makes it so haunting. Not because it's scary, but because it's real. That night still lives in my body more than it does in my memory. I can tell the story clearly. I can explain every detail, but the real weight of it is something that sits deeper than words. It was one of those moments where life splits cleanly into a before and an after, even though on the outside, nothing about me looks different. There were 4 of us in the car, friends, young, careless in the way people are when they believe they have time, when danger still feels theoretical instead of real. We were driving on the highway in the middle of a blizzard. The kind of blizzard where visibility drops without warning, where the world turns white and depth disappears. Snow was coming down hard, thick and heavy, sticking to everything. The road looked deceptively open, but it wasn't safe. Not even close. I was driving. We were doing about 85 miles per hour. That fact alone makes my stomach twist now. At the time, it didn't feel insane. It felt fast, sure, but not terrifying. Cars were still passing. The road was still moving. There was that false confidence you get when you haven't been punished yet. When nothing bad has happened, your brain convinces you that nothing will. Then it happened. The car started to lose traction. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just a subtle shift, like the road itself had moved under us. The steering wheel suddenly felt lighter, less connected. The car veered slightly to one side. I reacted instinctively, correcting the wheel, easing it back. For a split second, I thought I had it under control, and then it veered the other way. Harder? That was the moment when everything slowed down and sped up at the same time. The wheel stopped responding the way it should. The tires weren't gripping anymore. The road was no longer something I could control. I remember thinking very clearly, this is bad. This is really bad. I tried to correct it again. I couldn't. The car spun. Not a small fishtail, not a gentle slide. We spun a full 180 degrees, going around so fast that my brain struggled to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. One moment we were facing forward, the next we were moving backwards down the highway at around 80 miles per hour. Backwards, in a blizzard, with traffic. That realization didn't even fully register until later. At the time, everything went strangely quiet. Not physically quiet, but mentally. The kind of silence that happens when shock takes over. No one screamed. No one said anything. There was no time for panic to form words. The only sound I remember clearly is the windshield wipers. Swish, swish, swish. And that sound still messes with me sometimes. It was so calm, so ordinary, completely disconnected from the chaos that was happening. The wipers kept moving like nothing was wrong, like we weren't sliding backward at highway speed, like our lives weren't balanced on a fraction of a second. Then we hit the ditch. The impact itself is fuzzy. I don't remember the exact moment of contact in a clean way. What I remember is the snow. The ditch was packed with about 6 feet of it. And when we went into it, the snow didn't just hit the car, it swallowed it. The best way I can describe it is like pulling a shirt over your head. 1 second you can see, the next second everything is white and muffled and close. Snow filled the windshield, the windows. The air felt heavy, like the world had closed in on us all at once. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no movement, just a white. That moment was terrifying in hindsight, but at the time, my brain was still in survival mode. It hadn't caught up to fear yet. It was just processing. Are we stopped? Are we alive? Is the car on fire? Is anyone screaming? Then we started moving. Doors opening, someone coughing, someone saying my name. The realization that we were all conscious, all breathing, all able to move. We climbed out of the car one by one, our boots sinking deep into the snow, our breath coming out in sharp clouds. No one was injured, not a scratch, no blood, no broken bones, no screaming pain. Just shock and adrenaline, and the overwhelming realization that we were standing outside a wrecked car in the middle of a blizzard. Then we looked at the car. That's when the reality really hit. The car had gone straight between 2 trees, not brushed them, not clipped them, straight between them. They were close enough that if we had hit either one, even slightly, we probably wouldn't have walked away. At that speed, a tree isn't just an obstacle. It's a wall. It's a sudden stop. It's the kind of impact that doesn't give you a second chance. If we had hit those trees, there's a very real chance I wouldn't be here writing this. There's a very real chance that 3 other people would have died with me. The difference between that outcome and the one we got was measured in inches, maybe less. Standing there in the snow, looking at that gap between the trees, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not fear, not relief, something heavier. Something that settled deep in my chest. Responsibility. I was the one behind the wheel. I was the one going too fast. I was the one who made the decisions that led us there. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly after the adrenaline started to fade, after the shock wore off enough for my thoughts to line up properly. I kept replaying the spin in my head. The moment the car veered. The moment I lost control. The sound of the wipers. The snow closing in. That night, I came within inches of killing myself and 3 other people. That's not dramatic. That's not exaggeration. That's just the truth. We were lucky. Unreasonably lucky. The kind of lucky that makes you uncomfortable when you think about it too long. Because luck isn't something you can rely on. It doesn't show up on command. It doesn't explain itself. It just appears or it doesn't. We stood there for a while, talking quietly. Our voices different than they had been before. Quieter, slower. Like we were afraid to raise them too much. Afraid to break something fragile that had settled over us. Traffic kept passing on the highway, headlights streaking through the snow, drivers unaware of how close they had just come to witnessing something horrific. Eventually, help came. The practical parts of the situation took over. Tow trucks, calls, logistics. All of it felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. My body was there, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment of silence before the impact. Later that night, when everything was over, when we were somewhere warm and safe, when everyone else was trying to relax or joke or calm down, it hit me fully. I couldn't stop shaking. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else noticed, but inside. My thoughts wouldn't slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the car spin again. I heard the wipers. I saw the snow. I felt that weightless moment where control disappeared. Sleep didn't come easily after that. In the days that followed, people told us how lucky we were. And they were right. Completely right. But hearing it over and over made it sink in deeper. Lucky meant it could have gone the other way. Lucky meant there was an outcome where we didn't walk away. Lucky meant there were versions of that night where parents got phone calls, where lives ended on a snowy highway. I thought a lot about those trees. I still do. Sometimes I picture the car hitting one of them. I imagine the sound it would have made. I imagine the sudden stop. I imagine what the inside of the car would have looked like. Those thoughts aren't pleasant, and I don't indulge them often, but they show up anyway, uninvited. That night changed how I drive. Not in a casual, I'll be a little more careful way. In a fundamental way. Speed feels different now. Weather feels different. The idea of control feels different. I know in my bones how quickly it can disappear, how one small mistake, one patch of ice, one overcorrection, can turn into something irreversible. It also changed how I think about responsibility. When you're driving alone, it's easy to forget what's at stake. When you have other people in the car, that changes. Their lives are in your hands, whether you want that responsibility or not. That night forced me to face that reality in the most brutal way possible, without actually paying the ultimate price for it. Sometimes I wonder why we walked away, why the car went between the trees instead of into them, why the snow was deep enough to cushion the impact instead of shallow enough to flip us, why no one got hurt. I don't have answers to those questions. I don't know if there's a reason. I don't know if it was pure chance or something else. I just know that when I stood there in the snow, staring at that gap between the trees, I felt like I had been given something back that I didn't deserve. Time. That night gave me time. Time to learn. Time to change. Time to grow older and look back and understand what almost happened. A lot of near-death stories talk about bright lights or dramatic realizations. Mine was quieter than that. It was the sound of windshield wipers, the feeling of snow closing in, the sight of two trees standing exactly where they could have ended everything. I don't tell this story to sound brave. I don't tell it to sound reckless. I tell it because it reminds me how thin the line is between normal life and absolute disaster. How quickly things can go wrong. How much responsibility we carry without always acknowledging it. That night, I was inches away from destroying 4 lives. Instead, we walked away. Alive, uninjured, changed. And every time I drive in bad weather now, every time I slow down when others don't, every time I feel that old instinct to push it and choose not to, I think about that blizzard, that spin, that ditch, and those 2 trees. And I remember how lucky we were, and how close we came to never getting the chance to remember anything at all. This is one of those stories that doesn't rely on ghosts, darkness, or the supernatural to be terrifying. There's nothing unreal about it. No shadows, no strange sounds, no things that go bump in the night. What makes it horrifying is that it is quiet, logical, and completely natural. The kind of fear that comes from realizing how badly we misunderstand danger when it doesn't look like danger at all. A friend of mine told me this story years ago. It happened in South Africa, where he worked as a veterinarian. He'd been a vet for a long time, experienced, calm, used to dealing with animals that scared most people. Snakes, large dogs, injured wildlife, none of it rattled him easily. He approached everything the same way he always did, with curiosity, training, and common sense. One day, a family came into his clinic carrying a large container. Inside was their pet snake. It was a python, one of the non-venomous kinds. Big enough to impress people, but not big enough to immediately alarm anyone who understood snakes. The family treated it like a normal household pet. They loved it. They trusted it. This wasn't a wild snake they had just caught. It had been raised around people. It was used to human presence. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't showing any of the behaviors people normally associate with danger. In fact, the family described it as gentle and calm, docile even. At the time, the snake was still relatively young, around 3 to 4 feet long. Not tiny, but not massive either. Well within the size range that many people feel comfortable keeping as a pet, especially people who live in places where snakes are common and not automatically feared. What made this case unusual wasn't illness or injury. The snake appeared perfectly healthy. No signs of parasites. No feeding issues. No strange marks or behavioral red flags that immediately stood out. The family didn't bring the snake in because it was sick. They brought it in because of how it had been sleeping. Normally, the snake slept the way snakes sleep, curled up, coiled loosely, sometimes tucked into warm corners of the house, sometimes wrapped around furniture or cushions. The family didn't keep it in a terrarium. It was allowed to roam the house freely. It would move on its own, choose where it wanted to rest, and generally behave the way it always had. But recently, something had changed. Instead of sleeping curled up, the snake had started sleeping stretched out, completely straight, rigid, almost like a long rod. At first, the family thought it was strange, but not alarming. Animals do odd things sometimes. They change habits. They adapt. What really caught their attention was where it was sleeping. The snake had started choosing the same spot almost every night, right next to the family's young daughter. She was its favorite spot, according to them. That's how they described it. They thought it was sweet. The snake would stretch itself out along the length of her body while she slept, not coiled around her, just lying straight beside her from head to toe. They joked about it. They took pictures. They thought it meant the snake liked her, trusted her, felt comfortable around her. But something about it didn't sit right with my friend. He listened to their story carefully, asked questions. How long had this been happening? How old was the snake? How often did it eat? How big was the girl? Where exactly did the snake position itself? How stiff was it when sleeping? The more details he gathered, the more uneasy he became. Still, he didn't jump to conclusions. As a vet, you don't panic without evidence. He examined the snake thoroughly, checked its muscles, its responsiveness, its breathing, its feeding history. Everything looked normal. The snake wasn't sick. It wasn't injured. It wasn't stressed in the way people usually think of stress. But the behavior bothered him. Sleeping straight like that wasn't common. not consistently, not in the same position every night, and the fact that it was doing it next to the same child over and over again made it impossible to ignore. So he did what professionals do when something doesn't add up. He called someone who knew more than he did. He contacted a snake expert, someone who specialized specifically in large constrictors, someone who had studied their behavior in captivity and in the wild, someone who understood not just how snakes move, but how they think. He explained the situation calmly, described the snake's size, its age, its feeding schedule, the fact that it roamed freely in the house, the fact that it slept straight instead of coiled, and most importantly, the fact that it slept that way next to the young daughter. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the snake expert said something that made my friend's blood run cold. Get the snake out of that house. Right now. Not later. Not after observation. Not with caution. Immediately. My friend asked why. Still calm, but now concerned. The snake expert didn't hesitate. That snake isn't sleeping, he said. He's measuring himself against the girl, waiting, seeing if he's big enough to eat her. That was it. No dramatics, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just a simple, horrifying explanation. Constriction snakes don't hunt the way people imagine. They don't always strike suddenly out of aggression. They don't need to be angry. They don't need to feel threatened. They are patient, calculating in their own way, instinct-driven, not emotional. When a constrictor plans to eat something large, it doesn't rush. It assesses. It measures. It aligns its body with its potential prey to determine whether swallowing is possible, whether the size matches, whether the effort is worth the risk. Sleeping stretched out next to the girl wasn't affection. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't trust. It was preparation. The snake was comparing lengths, body to body, night after night, growing a little more each week, waiting for the moment when instinct would tell it. The answer was yes. That's the part that makes this story unbearable to think about. The snake didn't hate the child. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't evil. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. The family had unknowingly put their daughter in danger, not because they were careless or cruel, but because they misunderstood what safety looks like. They assumed that because the snake was non-venomous, raised in captivity, and gentle, it was harmless. They assumed familiarity meant safety. They assumed that because nothing bad had happened yet, nothing bad would happen at all. They were wrong. My friend didn't waste time arguing or debating after that call. He told the family the snake had to be removed from the house immediately. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't soften the truth. He explained what the expert had told him, and this time the explanation landed differently. The joking stopped. The laughter disappeared. The reality of how close they had come to losing their daughter hit them all at once. If that snake had grown just a little more, if it had been fed a little less frequently, if the child had been sleeping deeper one night, if instinct had flipped from assessment to action, there would have been no screaming, no warning, no chance to intervene in time. That's what makes this story so disturbing. Not the image of the snake itself, but how quietly danger was waiting. How patient it was, how close it was every single night. The child slept peacefully, completely unaware. The parents slept peacefully, trusting an animal they believed they understood, and the snake waited. People love to tell this story as a spooky anecdote, something shocking to repeat online. But stripped of exaggeration, what it really is a lesson about instinct versus intention. About how animals don't share our moral framework. They don't understand love the way we do. They don't interpret closeness as bonding in the way humans do. They interpret it as opportunity. My friend still talks about that case sometimes, not with excitement, but with a kind of quiet seriousness. It's one of the moments that reminded him why respecting animals means respecting their nature, not projecting ours onto them. The family never forgave themselves completely, even though nothing happened. That's another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes nothing bad happens, and that's enough to haunt you forever, knowing how close you were, knowing how easily things could have gone another way. That little girl grew up never knowing how close she came to being prey in her own home. And that's the part that stays with me. Not the snake, not the expert's words, but the idea that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lies still. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it measures. And sometimes the only thing separating safety from tragedy is someone asking the right question before it's too late. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. It was poker night. In our family, poker night wasn't a small, quiet thing. We had a big family, so when everyone came together, it easily turned into 8 or 10 people crowded around a table in the kitchen. The kitchen was the heart of the house, warm and familiar, filled with voices, laughter, and the constant clatter of cards on wood. Glasses were poured and refilled, mostly whiskey, and the night stretched on the way it always did when no one was in a hurry to sleep. The adults played cards and drank, teasing each other, arguing about hands, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't that funny. Time didn't feel real anymore. Midnight passed without anyone noticing. The kids, myself included, were sprawled out in the living room nearby, trying to stay awake at first, then slowly giving in to sleep. The living room wasn't far from the kitchen. You could hear everything. The laughter, the cards being shuffled, the occasional burst of shouting when someone won a big hand. The house felt alive in that comfortable, familiar way. Nothing about the night felt wrong. At some point, while everyone was still sitting around the table, something happened that changed the tone instantly. There was a half-empty glass of whiskey sitting on the table. Nothing special about it. It wasn't near the edge. It wasn't being touched. No one was paying attention to it. Then slowly it began to move. Not a sudden slide, not a tip or a wobble. It moved steadily across the table. At first it was subtle enough that someone might have questioned their own eye. But then it kept going. The glass traveled far enough that there was no denying it. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Laughter died instantly. Everyone froze and stared at the glass as it continued to slide on its own. For a moment, no one said anything. It was the kind of silence that falls hard and heavy, the kind where your brain is trying to catch up to what you just saw. When someone finally spoke, their voice sounded strange, like it didn't quite belong in the room anymore. Everyone leaned forward. Someone checked under the table. Another person stood up and looked around, half laughing nervously, half expecting to catch someone in a prank. But there was nothing. No strings, no tricks, no one touching the table. And the table itself made it even harder to explain. It wasn't smooth or polished enough for a glass to just slide like that, especially not when it was half full. Anyone who had ever set a drink on that table knew how unlikely it was. They joked about it. because that's what people do when something doesn't make sense and fear hasn't fully settled yet. Someone said maybe the table wasn't level. Someone else laughed and said maybe the house was haunted. But the laughter sounded forced. Everyone knew what they had seen, and no explanation quite fit. The game continued, but it wasn't the same. The energy had shifted. People were still playing cards, still drinking, but now there was an edge to it. People glanced at their glasses more often. Someone repositioned theirs closer to the center of the table, almost without realizing why. The house, which had felt warm and noisy before, now felt watchful. Sometime later, the second thing happened. By then, the kids were asleep in the living room. I remember being half asleep myself, drifting in and out. The sounds from the kitchen blending with the music playing on the stereo. There was a tape in the stereo, music playing loud enough to fill the house. It was the kind of background noise that adults use to stretch a night even longer, something familiar and comforting. Then the music stopped. It wasn't gradual. It didn't fade out. It just stopped. That alone would have been enough to get attention, because no one remembered touching the stereo. But before anyone could fully react, the tape started playing again. This time, it wasn't music. It was voices. At first, people didn't understand what they were hearing. It took a few seconds for it to sink in. The voices coming from the speakers were their own, clear and unmistakable. The conversation they had been having earlier that night was playing back through the stereo, not from hours ago, from the past 10 minutes. People recognized their own words, their own laughter, jokes they remembered telling just a short while before. The tone, the rhythm, everything was there, like a recording pulled straight from the air and fed back to them. The room went silent again. No one moved toward the stereo. No one reached to turn it off right away. It was like everyone was afraid to break the moment, afraid that touching anything would somehow make it worse. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. For that recording to exist, the tape would have had to stop playing music, record the conversation for 10 minutes, and then start playing it back. But no one had noticed the music stopping earlier. No one had seen anyone go near the stereo, and even if someone had tried, it wouldn't have gone unnoticed. The music had been loud. The room was full. There was no quiet gap where 10 minutes of silence could have passed without anyone reacting. Someone would have said something. Someone would have noticed. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. How did it record? When did it record? Who recorded it? No one had an answer. The tape kept playing for a bit, replaying pieces of conversation that now sounded strange and wrong, like hearing your own voice from a place it shouldn't exist. Eventually, someone snapped out of it and turned the stereo off. The sudden silence that followed felt deeper than before. After that, the night ended quickly. People didn't announce it. No one said they were scared. But chairs scraped back sooner than expected. Glasses were left unfinished. The poker game dissolved without argument or laughter. The kids were quietly gathered up and carried to beds or couches. Conversations dropped to whispers, then stopped altogether. Sleep didn't come easily that night, even for those who tried to laugh it off later, even for those who insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Something lingered. The image of the glass sliding across the table. The sound of their own voices playing back from nowhere. The feeling that something had been present in the room with them. Something that didn't belong to any of the people sitting there. To this day, no one has been able to explain it in a way that fully makes sense. The glass shouldn't have moved. The tape shouldn't have recorded anything while music was playing. The timing shouldn't have worked. And yet it all happened, witnessed by multiple people at the same time. What makes it unsettling isn't just that it happened. It's that it happened in such a normal setting. A family kitchen, a card game, kids sleeping in the next room. No darkness, no isolation, no obvious reason for fear. Just a regular night that took a sharp turn into something no one could explain. Years later, the details are still clear. The way the room felt afterward. The way people avoided talking about it directly. The way no one wanted to be the last one awake in the house that night. Some things fade with time, but moments like that don't. They settle into memory and wait. The house went on being a house. Poker nights continued, music played, life returned to normal. But that night remained separate, set apart by two small, impossible events that no one ever managed to fully forget. Not because it proved anything supernatural, for sure, but because it reminded everyone there that sometimes things happen that don't care whether we believe in them or not. And once you see something like that with your own eyes, once you hear something like that with your own ears, it becomes impossible to completely shake the feeling that there are things happening around us that we don't understand, quietly, without warning, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. A few years ago, something happened to me that I still don't have a name for. I don't tell it often because it sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, like something pulled from a bad creepypasta or an internet horror story. But I know what I saw. And more importantly, I know how it felt. That part is impossible to fake or forget. I was staying at my aunt's house at the time. It was a quiet place, the kind of house that settles into complete stillness at night. The bedroom I was sleeping in was downstairs, which already felt a little isolating once the rest of the house went dark. Everyone else was asleep upstairs, and by the time this happened, the house had been silent for hours. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up. Not from a nightmare, not from a noise, just that sudden, annoying kind of hunger that makes it impossible to fall back asleep. I lay there for a bit, staring at the ceiling, debating whether it was worth getting up. Eventually, hunger won. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The kitchen layout is something I remember clearly. It had 2 large windows that faced directly into the backyard. During the day, they let in a lot of light and made the room feel open. At night, they did the opposite. They turned the kitchen into a box surrounded by darkness. There were no curtains drawn that night, just bare glass reflecting the dim interior lights back at you. I flicked on a small light, enough to see, but not enough to fully chase away the shadows. As I stepped further into the kitchen, my eyes adjusted, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain didn't register it as anything real. Through one of the windows, right at eye level, there was something staring at me. Not a reflection, not a shadow from inside the house, something on the other side of the glass. What I saw looked like a human head, but wrong in ways that are hard to describe unless you've seen something that immediately triggers that deep, instinctive sense of, this isn't right. It didn't have a face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth that I could make out. Just the shape of a head, smooth and blank where features should have been. The shape itself was off, more triangular than a normal human head, narrowing toward the chin in a way that didn't look natural. The proportions didn't match anyone I'd ever seen. And behind it, barely visible in the low light, was a body that seemed too big for the head, too wide, too solid. It was hard to tell exactly how large it was, but I could tell it wasn't standing upright. It looked like it was kneeling, lowering itself so that its head was level with the window, pressed close to the glass. It wasn't moving. It wasn't banging on the window or trying to get in. It was just there, staring. I froze. Every normal reaction I should have had lined up in my head all at once. Run, scream, turn around, get away from the window, wake someone up. That's what a logical person would do. That's what I would expect myself to do. But I didn't. Instead, something else happened. I felt this overwhelming compulsion to walk toward it. Not curiosity in a normal sense. Not bravery. Not defiance. It felt more like being pulled, like my body had decided something without consulting my brain. My feet moved before I fully realized what I was doing. Each step felt strangely calm, like my fear had been muted or pushed aside. I walked closer to the window. The closer I got, the less I could see. The darkness outside swallowed detail, and the reflection of the kitchen lights blurred the shape even more. But the presence didn't fade. If anything, it felt stronger, heavier, like I was stepping into the focus of something's attention. I remember thinking very distantly that this was wrong, that I shouldn't be doing this. But that thought felt weak, like it was being held underwater. I got to within about 2 feet of the glass. That's when whatever had been suppressing my fear snapped. It was sudden and violent, like a switch being flipped in my head. 1 second I was calm, walking forward, and the next my brain was screaming at me. "Run! You idiot! Run!" Pure panic flooded my body all at once. My heart slammed into my ribs, my chest tightened. My legs felt like they were filled with electricity. The compulsion vanished, replaced by a raw animal fear that didn't need explanation. I didn't look at it again. I turned around and ran. I ran back down the short hallway and into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop to turn on lights. I didn't stop to check if it was following me. I dove into bed, pulled the covers over myself, and lay there shaking, listening for sounds that never came. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there until morning, staring at the wall, replaying the image over and over in my mind. The blank head, the wrong shape, the way it looked like it was kneeling, the way it felt like it wanted me to come closer, or needed me to. When the sun finally came up, everything looked normal. The backyard was empty, no footprints, no disturbed grass, nothing out of place. In daylight, the kitchen windows looked harmless, almost ridiculous. Just glass and reflections. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. Even now, writing it down, I know how it sounds. It sounds like a bad Slender Man knockoff. It sounds like something my brain made up in the dark. It sounds like sleep deprivation or imagination or fear playing tricks on me. But here's the thing. I wasn't half asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't drunk or high or panicking beforehand. And I've never felt that kind of compulsion before or since. Fear, I understand. Imagination, I understand. But that pull, that calm urge to walk towards something I should have been terrified of, that's what haunts me. It felt external, like it didn't belong to me. Like my survival instincts were overridden for a moment and then violently restored. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was an animal distorted by darkness and my own mind. I don't know if it was some kind of hallucination. I don't know if it was something else entirely. Sometimes, half joking and half not, I tell myself it was aliens or something not from here, because at least that explanation acknowledges how wrong it felt. What I do know is this. Something was outside that window, and for a brief moment, it had more influence over me than my own fear. That's what chills me. Not the shape, not the lack of a face, not even the idea of something watching me in the dark. It's the fact that instead of running, my first instinct was to walk toward it. And that is something I still don't understand. My friend once told me a story that came from her mom, who heard it directly from a close friend of hers. I'll call her G. It's one of those stories that sounds unreal when you first hear it, but the more it's told, the more it settles into something deeply unsettling. Not because of violence or ghosts, but because of betrayal, silence, and the way one decision can quietly destroy a life long after the moment has passed. G was single at the time this happened. She wasn't unhappy, just open to life, open to experiences. When she booked a cruise, it wasn't about finding love. It was about getting away, relaxing, enjoying herself, doing something for her. Cruises have a way of making life feel suspended. You're surrounded by strangers, cut off from your routine, floating between places with nothing to do but exist in the moment. That's where she met him. They met early on in the trip. He was charming in an effortless way. Not overly smooth, not pushy, just confident and attentive. He knew how to listen. He knew how to make her laugh. He seemed genuinely interested in her, not just as someone to flirt with, but as a person. In an environment like that, where days blur together and nights feel endless, it's easy to grow close fast. They spent most of the vacation together. They ate meals together, walked the deck at night, talked for hours. One thing led to another, and they ended up hooking up. Not just once. It became a full vacation romance, the kind people romanticize, the kind that feels intense because you know it has an expiration date. There's a strange comfort in that. You don't have to think too far ahead. You just live inside the moment. The entire time, he seemed normal, caring, present. He never raised her suspicions. He never acted secretive in a way that felt alarming. When the trip started coming to an end, there was the usual sadness that comes with knowing it's over. They talked about staying in touch once they got back home. He gave her a name. He gave her contact information. She had no reason to doubt him. Before they parted ways, he gave her a gift. He told her not to open it until she got home. That detail stuck with her, but not in a negative way. People exchange gifts on trips all the time. It felt meaningful, intimate, like something special meant to outlast the vacation. She packed it carefully and didn't open it, exactly as he asked. They said goodbye, hugged, promised to talk soon, and then went their separate ways. Back home, real life rushed back in. Work, responsibilities, normal routines. The glow of the vacation faded the way it always does. After a day or two, she tried to contact him. The number didn't work. The email bounced back. Social media searches turned up nothing. At first, she told herself it was probably a mistake. Maybe he gave her the wrong info accidentally. Maybe there was a typo. Then the realization crept in. The name he gave her wasn't real. Neither was any of the contact information. He had vanished completely. That hurt. It was confusing and embarrassing in a quiet way. Being ghosted hurts under normal circumstances, but this felt heavier because of how close they had been. Still, she tried to move on. Vacation romances end all the time. Not all of them turn into real relationships. She told herself it was just one of those things. Eventually, she remembered the gift. She hadn't opened it yet. One evening, back in the safety of her own home, she finally did. Inside the wrapping was a small box shaped like a casket. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. It was miniature, carefully made, unmistakably a coffin. Confusion hit before fear. Why would someone give this as a gift? Was it a dark joke? Some strange sense of humor she hadn't picked up on? Her hands were shaking as she opened it. Inside was a note. The message was short. No explanation, no apology, no signature. It read, "Welcome to the club. You have AIDS." That was it. No softness, no hesitation, no humanity. Just those words. The world stopped making sense in that moment. Everything before it, the cruise, the romance, the laughter, the intimacy, instantly transformed into something else entirely. Every memory became contaminated by that sentence. She didn't know what to feel first. Fear, shock, rage, disbelief. All of it crashed down at once. She immediately went to the doctor. The test confirmed it. He had known. That's what destroyed her the most. Not just the disease itself, but the intent behind it. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't ignorance. He didn't unknowingly pass something along and panic afterward. He knew he was infected. He chose not to tell her. He chose to sleep with her anyway. He chose to disappear. And then he chose to leave her with that message. That gift wasn't meant to warn her. It was meant to mark her. The note didn't say, "I'm sorry." It didn't say, "Get tested." It didn't say, "I didn't know how to tell you." It said, "Welcome to the club," as if what he did was some kind of initiation. As if this was something shared. As if ruining someone else's life made him feel less alone. There was no way to find him. The name was fake. The information was fake. The cruise company couldn't help. He had disappeared as cleanly as he had appeared. He moved through her life like a ghost, leaving behind something that would follow her forever. G's life changed completely after that. Not all at once, not in a dramatic explosion, but slowly, painfully. Doctor visits, medications, explaining to future partners, living with the knowledge that something she trusted had turned into something irreversible. There was anger, of course, but there was also shame, even though she had done nothing wrong. That's one of the cruelest parts of it. Victims often carry guilt that doesn't belong to them. The psychological damage went deeper than the physical one. Trust became difficult. Intimacy became complicated. Every memory of that cruise was poisoned. What should have been a happy escape became a turning point she never asked for. A single week altered the rest of her life. What makes this story so terrifying isn't just the disease. It's the deliberate cruelty, the planning, the lies, the way he waited until it was too late. The fact that he didn't just disappear, but chose to reveal the truth in the coldest way possible, from a distance, without having to face the damage he caused. There are no monsters in this story, in the traditional sense. No masks, no weapons, no dark alleys. Just a man who smiled, listened, touched, and lied, and a woman who trusted him. That's why this story sticks with people who hear it. It's not about fear in the moment, it's about the delayed horror. The realization that sometimes the most dangerous people don't feel dangerous at all. They feel kind, they feel exciting, they feel safe, until they're gone. And you're left holding the truth in your hands, wondering how something that felt so normal could end in something so devastating. It's the kind of story that makes you rethink chance encounters. Not in a paranoid way, but in a sobering one. It reminds you that trust is powerful, and when it's abused, the damage can be permanent. And the worst part is knowing that he didn't just disappear after that cruise. He likely did it again and again, leaving behind nothing but silence, lies, and small caskets no one should ever have to open. This story has been told to me more than once, and every time I hear it, it leaves the same hollow feeling in my chest. Not because of anything supernatural, not because of gore or spectacle, but because of how ordinary it all begins. It's the kind of situation that feels familiar, safe, even comforting at first. And that's what makes what comes after so hard to shake. A woman meets a man through a dating website. Nothing unusual about that. Millions of people do it every day. They talk online, exchange messages, get to know each other slowly. He seems normal, kind, funny, reliable. They go on dates, spend time together, learn each other's routines. There are no obvious red flags, no dramatic warning signs. If anything, things feel easy. They date for a few months, long enough that the relationship feels real and stable. Long enough that moving in together doesn't feel rushed or reckless. It feels like the next step. So she does it. She moves into his apartment, bringing her clothes, her personal things, her sense of safety with her. It becomes their place, home. The first few weeks go by without incident. She settles into a routine, work during the day, evenings at home. The apartment feels familiar now. She knows where everything is, the sounds it makes, the way it feels when it's quiet. The relationship feels normal, comfortable. She doesn't feel watched or uneasy. If anything, she feels like she's building a life. Then one afternoon, she comes home from work and something feels off. Not in a dramatic way. She isn't scared. She doesn't sense danger. She just feels exhausted. More tired than usual. The kind of tired that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on your body from the inside. She tells herself it's probably stress or a long day. Without thinking too much about it, she decides to lie down in the bedroom for a bit. She falls asleep. She doesn't know how long she's been asleep when she wakes up, but the first thing she registers is noise. Loud, sharp, repetitive banging. Not the kind of noise you can ignore or half dream through. It's aggressive, violent, the sound of hammering against walls. Her heart jumps instantly. For a few seconds, she lies there frozen, trying to orient herself. She listens carefully, trying to figure out what's happening. Her mind starts offering explanations, because that's what it does when faced with fear. Maybe her boyfriend came home early. Maybe he's fixing something. Maybe it's construction in the building. But none of those explanations sit right. The banging is wrong. It's too loud, too frantic, too deliberate. She realizes she doesn't know how long she's been asleep. Minutes? Hours? That uncertainty makes everything worse. She doesn't know what time it is. She doesn't know who's supposed to be home. She doesn't know what's happening outside the bedroom door. Fear creeps in slowly, then all at once. She considers getting up and opening the door, but something stops her. A feeling she can't explain. The sound doesn't feel like normal household noise. It feels purposeful, and that terrifies her. She imagines stepping into the hallway and being confronted by something she isn't prepared to face. So instead, she reaches for her phone. Her hands are shaking as she dials the police. She keeps her voice low when the dispatcher answers, explaining that she's in her apartment, that she woke up to loud banging, that she's scared and doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't exaggerate. She doesn't scream. She just tells the truth. The dispatcher takes her seriously. They tell her to stay where she is and that a unit is on the way. She hangs up and waits. The banging continues. Every sound feels louder now, closer. She stays perfectly still, barely breathing, listening to the noise echo through the apartment. Her heart is pounding so hard she's sure it must be audible outside the room. She checks her phone again, watching the seconds crawl by. Then she hears the intercom. The sound cuts through the banging and startles her almost as badly. She hears a familiar voice through the speaker. Her boyfriend. Calm. Controlled. He's talking to someone downstairs, explaining that everything is fine, that there's no emergency, that there's no need for anyone to come up. He sounds convincing. He hangs up. Her stomach drops. The realization hits her slowly, like cold water spreading through her body. He's home. He knows the police are coming, and he's trying to stop them. She stays in the bedroom, phone clutched in her hand, heart racing. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know if she should call the dispatcher back or stay silent. Before she can decide, the doorbell rings, not once, repeatedly. Then voices, loud, authoritative. Police officers shouting for the door to be open. She hears her boyfriend move toward the door. She hears it open. She hears voices overlapping. A tense conversation she can't fully make out from where she is. Minutes pass. Every second feels unbearable. She imagines him talking his way out of it, convincing them everything is normal, sending them away. Then footsteps. Heavy boots. The sound of multiple people entering the apartment. Someone knocks on the bedroom door and identifies themselves as police. When they open the door and step inside, the look on their faces tells her everything before they even speak. They aren't calm. They aren't casual. Their expressions are serious, controlled, careful. They tell her her boyfriend is under arrest. They tell her they are going to escort her out of the apartment immediately. Then one of them says something she never expected to hear. They recommend that she let them blindfold her until they reach the stairwell, for her own sake. The words don't make sense at first. She's confused, still half in shock. She asks why. They don't go into detail, but their tone makes it clear that they aren't being dramatic. They aren't trying to scare her. They are trying to protect her from seeing something. She refuses. She insists on walking out without a blindfold. She wants to understand what's happening. She wants to see it with her own eyes. The officers hesitate, then finally agree. They lead her out of the bedroom. As she walks through what is now supposed to be her home, the truth reveals itself piece by piece. The banging she heard wasn't random. It wasn't construction. It wasn't fixing something harmless. Plastic sheets cover the walls. Plastic covers the floor, not sloppily, carefully, deliberately, like someone preparing a space. On a table nearby, there is a collection of sharp objects laid out in the plain view, not tucked away, not hidden, arranged. The apartment doesn't look like a home anymore. It looks like a staging area. In that moment, everything clicks into place. The exhaustion she felt when she came home, the way she fell asleep so suddenly, the timing, the banging, the urgency in the officers' voices, the blindfold. She understands what almost happened. If she hadn't woken up when she did, if she hadn't felt scared enough to call the police, if she had opened the bedroom door instead of staying inside, she might not have walked out of that apartment alive. The weight of that realization is crushing. It hits her all at once, making her knees weak. The idea that the person she trusted, the person she lived with, the person she slept beside, had been preparing to hurt her in ways she can't even fully process, is too much to take in at once. The police escort her out of the building. The air outside feels unreal, too bright, too open, like stepping into a different world entirely. She keeps looking back at the building, trying to reconcile the normal-looking exterior with what she just saw inside. Later, she learns more. The plastic sheets weren't an accident. The tools weren't for work. The banging was him setting up, preparing, waiting. There is no dramatic speech, no explanation from him that makes it make sense, no moment where he suddenly snaps. What makes it so horrifying is how methodical it all was, how planned, how calm. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was intention. The aftermath is just as brutal in a quieter way. She has to find somewhere else to live immediately. She has to collect her belongings under police supervision. She has to explain to friends and family why she suddenly doesn't live with the man she moved in with weeks earlier. She has to replay every moment of their relationship, searching for signs she missed. Trust becomes difficult after that. Sleep becomes difficult. Being alone in a room becomes difficult. The thought that she could have been killed not by a stranger, not by someone lurking in the dark, but by someone she loved and trusted, changes the way she sees the world. What makes this story linger is how close it came to ending differently. There was no dramatic chase, no screaming confrontation, no last-second heroics. Just a woman waking up at the wrong moment, hearing the wrong sound, and choosing to trust her fear instead of dismiss it. If she had decided she was overreacting, if she had convinced herself it was nothing, if she had waited, she would not be here. That's what makes it terrifying. Not the plastic, not the tools, but the quiet realization that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it lives with you. Sometimes it sleeps next to you. Sometimes it waits until you're most vulnerable. And the only thing standing between survival and tragedy is one decision made in fear. She never forgot that night, and neither does anyone who hears the story, because it reminds you of something uncomfortable but important, that listening to your instincts can save your life, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem safest at first. In the town I'm from, there's a story that everyone knows, even if they don't always talk about it openly. It isn't an urban legend or a rumor that got twisted over time. It's real. It happened. And the fact that it happened to the same family, in the same house, across different decades, is what makes it so deeply unsettling. The man at the center of it, I'll call him Joe. Back in the early 1980s, around 1982 or 1983, something unimaginable happened in that house. Joe's brother murdered their entire family. Parents, siblings, everyone who was living there at the time. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a crime of passion that spiraled out of control. It was deliberate, violent, and final. The kind of crime that permanently marks a town even if people try to move on. Joe survived for one reason only. He was the oldest brother, and he had already moved away to college. That fact alone is enough to mess with your head. One small difference in timing, one step forward in life, and it spared him from being in that house when everything ended. Everyone else stayed behind. Everyone else died. Joe was miles away, living a completely different version of reality, unaware that his entire childhood family was about to be erased. When the news reached him, his life changed forever. There's no coming back from something like that. Losing your entire family in one night, knowing it was done by someone you grew up with, someone who shared your home, your blood, your memories. That kind of loss doesn't fade. It doesn't soften. It becomes part of who you are. Most people would never set foot in that house again. Most people would avoid it entirely. Sell it, tear it down, pretend it never existed. Even driving past it would feel wrong, like poking at a wound that never healed. Joe didn't do that. A year or two after the murders, Joe moved back into that same house. The exact house where his parents were killed, where his siblings died, where his brother committed the crime that destroyed his family. He didn't just visit it. He didn't just stop by to collect belongings. He moved in and started a new life there. That decision alone is hard to comprehend. People in town talked about it quietly at first. They didn't understand how he could do it. Some thought he was trying to reclaim the space. to take back something that violence had stolen. Others thought it was denial or stubbornness, or grief taking a strange shape. Whatever the reason, he stayed. He got married. He raised children in that house. His kids grew up playing in the same rooms where their grandparents and aunts and uncles had died years before. They slept in bedrooms that once held unimaginable horror. They celebrated birthdays and holidays under the same roof where blood had once been spilled. And for a while, life went on. Time passed the way it always does, slowly. Then all at once, the kids grew up. By the mid-2000s, they had moved out, starting their own lives elsewhere. The house grew quieter. Joe and his wife stayed behind, aging together in that same place, surrounded by memories most people would never want to live with. Then, decades after the first tragedy, it happened again. Around 2013 or 2014, Joe's wife was murdered. Not somewhere else, not in a different town. In that same house. The house that had already been the site of one mass murder now claimed another life from the same family. A different era, a different person, a different set of circumstances. But the same walls, the same foundation, the same address. When people heard about it, the shock rippled through the town all over again. It felt unreal. Like history looping back on itself in the cruelest way possible. People who had grown up hearing about the murders from the 80s suddenly had to face the fact that the house was back in the news, back in police reports, back in whispered conversations. Joe lost his wife the same way he lost his family. Violently. Suddenly. In the place that was supposed to be home. By then, his children were grown and living elsewhere. They didn't move back in. They couldn't. No one would expect them to. Most people assumed Joe would finally leave, that this second tragedy would be the breaking point. That no one, no matter how strong or stubborn or attached, could stay after that. But Joe did. He continued living there, alone. In the house where his entire childhood family was murdered. In the house where his wife was later killed. He wakes up every day in a place layered with death. He eats meals in rooms that have seen more grief than most people encounter in a lifetime. He walks through hallways that hold echoes of people who are gone, not from natural causes, not from old age, but from violence. I cannot imagine that kind of existence. There is no way in hell I would still be living there. And I don't say that lightly. I understand attachment to a home. I understand history and memory and the way places can feel like anchors in your life. But there comes a point where a place stops being just a house and becomes something else entirely. Something heavy, something oppressive, something that never lets you forget. That house crossed that line a long time ago. It isn't just one tragedy frozen in the past. It's multiple, spaced out across decades, touching the same man's life again and again. At that point, it feels less like coincidence and more like a curse, even if you don't believe in that sort of thing. Not because of ghosts or supernatural forces, but because of what the human mind can carry. Talk about a haunting. Not the kind with footsteps or shadows or cold spots. The kind that lives in memory. The kind that doesn't need to manifest because it's already there, woven into every wall, every floorboard, every quiet moment. What makes this story even heavier is that it's real. This isn't a rumor passed down through generations. This isn't a story that grew more dramatic with each retelling. I can confirm it's true. My cousin was married to Joe's son for several years. My mom and dad were good friends with Joe and his wife while she was still alive. These aren't distant names. They're real people connected to my family and my community. I've seen Joe. I've spoken to people who know him well. He isn't some strange recluse or horror movie caricature. He's just a man who has endured more loss than most people could survive. A man who, for reasons only he fully understands, chose to stay rooted in the place where everything was taken from him. Sometimes I wonder why. Maybe the house is the last physical connection he has to his parents and siblings. Maybe leaving it would feel like losing them all over again. Maybe it's guilt, survivor's guilt that never faded. The idea that he lived because he wasn't there, and so he owes something to the place that held everyone else. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe after that much loss, fear doesn't work the same way anymore. Maybe when you've already lost everything once, the idea of staying in a place marked by tragedy doesn't feel as unbearable as it would to someone who hasn't. Maybe the house stopped being frightening because the worst thing that could happen already did more than once. Still, I can't wrap my head around it. I think about the silence in that house now. No kids, no wife. Just Joe, alone with decades of memories layered on top of each other. Every room must carry ghosts, even if they're only psychological ones. The laughter that once filled the place, the arguments, the ordinary moments that ended in extraordinary violence. I wonder if he hears things at night, not supernatural things, but the sounds of a house settling, the kind that can mimic footsteps if you're already on edge. I wonder if certain rooms feel heavier than others. I wonder if he avoids parts of the house entirely, or if he moves through it without hesitation, numb to its history. Most of all, I wonder what it does to a person to live like that. Some people say places hold energy. Some people say trauma seeps into walls. Others say it's all in our heads. Maybe it doesn't matter which explanation is true. Living in a place where so much violence occurred, especially violence tied directly to your own life, would shape anyone's mind, belief system, and sense of reality. Joe's story isn't scary in a jump scare way. It's scary in a slow, existential way. It's the fear of realizing that life doesn't balance itself out, that surviving one tragedy doesn't protect you from another, that sometimes pain revisits the same address, the same name, the same family, over and over again. It's the fear of imagining yourself in his place and realizing you wouldn't be strong enough to do what he did, or maybe you would. And that thought is just as unsettling. Every town has a house like that. A place people lower their voices around. A place kids dare each other to approach. A place that carries stories no one ever fully forgets. But most of the time, those houses are tied to one event, one moment frozen in time. This one isn't. This one followed a man across his entire life. And the fact that he's still there, still waking up in that house every morning, still living among memories that would break most people, is both disturbing and strangely tragic. Not because of ghosts, but because of endurance. Because sometimes the most haunting thing isn't what lurks in a place. It's the person who refuses to leave it. When I was in middle school, there were two girls in my class who stood out to me in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. They weren't loud or dramatic about it. They didn't tell their stories to get attention. In fact, if you didn't know them well, you might not have known anything was different about them at all. They were just classmates, kids like the rest of us, doing homework, passing notes, complaining about tests. What made them different was something most of us never had to think about. They were asylum seekers. This was back when that was still possible, back when families fleeing real danger could still find a way out. At the time, I didn't have the language or life experience to grasp how heavy that word really was. I knew it meant they came from somewhere else. I knew it meant something bad had happened. I didn't yet understand how close to death both of them had been. One of the girls was from Russia. If you didn't know her background, you would never have guessed she'd grown up surrounded by fear. She was sweet in a way that felt almost old-fashioned, soft-spoken, kind, the type of kid teachers adored. She had this cherubic look about her, round cheeks, gentle eyes, the kind of face you associate with safety, not danger. It felt wrong, almost cruel, knowing what her family had gone through. Over time, bits of her story came out. Not in a dramatic confession, not in a single moment, but in fragments shared during conversations when she felt comfortable enough. Her family had owned or operated a hotel back in Russia. Her dad ran it, worked it, built his life around it. It wasn't just a business. It was their livelihood, their stability, their future. Then the mob came. Not metaphorically, not in some vague sense of organized crime. Actual mobsters, men with power, connections, and absolutely no hesitation about using violence. They wanted the hotel. They didn't want to negotiate. They didn't want to pay a fair price. They wanted control. And when her father refused to sell, they didn't just threaten him financially. They threatened his life. They threatened the family. At some point, the threats crossed a line where it became clear they weren't just intimidation tactics. These were people who killed others for less. Her family understood that saying no didn't just mean business consequences. It meant they were marked. There was no police force they could turn to that would actually protect them. No system strong enough to push back against people like that. So they left. They didn't pack slowly. They didn't plan a careful goodbye. They fled. They abandoned the hotel, their home, their life, because staying meant almost certain death. Imagine being a child and realizing that your family isn't moving for opportunity or adventure, but because someone powerful has decided you are in the way. She carried that with her quietly. She didn't talk about it much. But sometimes when someone complained about something small, a bad grade, a strict teacher, a canceled plan, you could see a look on her face that suggested a different scale of problems entirely. She knew what it meant to lose everything overnight. She knew what it meant to be hunted, even if she was too young to fully process it at the time. The other girl's story stayed with me even more, maybe because of how blunt and final it was. She was from Mexico. Unlike the girl from Russia, she was more open about where she came from. But even then, she didn't talk about it casually. When she did share her story, it was almost matter of fact, like she had learned early on that dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. Her family had crossed the border multiple times. Not in a dramatic movie-style chase, not hiding in the desert the way people sometimes imagine, but driving. Normal roads, normal cars. The kind of trip that should have been boring, uneventful. One time during one of those drives, everything went wrong. They were stopped by an armored vehicle. Not police, not military. Cartel. Armed men, protected by steel. Operating with complete confidence that no one would stop them because no one could. The kind of people who didn't need to raise their voices to be terrifying. Their power was already understood. The vehicle blocked the road. There was no way around it. No quick escape. No place to hide. The family was trapped in their car, surrounded by people who could kill them without consequence. The cartel members approached and spoke calmly, almost casually. They didn't yell. They didn't panic. They told the family exactly what was going to happen. They made her older cousin get out of the car. He was 16 years old. 16. Still a kid, even if life had already forced him to grow up faster than most. He stepped out of the car knowing what the men were capable of, knowing that this wasn't a bluff. The family watched from inside, helpless, frozen, unable to intervene. The cartel members told them they had a choice. They could keep driving, or they could all get shot right there. No negotiation, no delay, no alternative option hidden between the lines, just a clean, brutal decision. The cousin didn't hesitate. He told them to go. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't try to run. He understood immediately what the choice meant. If they stayed, everyone would die. If they left, he would. So he told them to drive, and they did. Her family drove away while her cousin was left behind, with armed men who had no reason to let him live. They didn't look back. Not because they didn't care, but because stopping would have meant death for everyone. That was the choice he made for them. She didn't know exactly what happened to him after that. She didn't need to. In places where cartel violence rules, you don't get closure. You don't get bodies. You don't get explanations. People just disappear. And everyone understands what that disappearance means. When she told this story, there was no dramatic pause, no tears, no shaking voice, just facts. As if this was simply how the world worked. As if this kind of decision was something families had to be prepared to make. I remember sitting there listening and feeling something in my chest tighten in a way I wasn't used to. I was a kid who had grown up with problems that felt big to me at the time. School stress, social drama, family arguments, all real, all painful in their own ways, but none of them existed on the same level as this. None of them involved choosing which family member would die so the rest could live. That realization stuck with me long after middle school ended. What freaked me out most wasn't just the violence itself. It was the absence of consequence. In both of these stories, the common thread wasn't cruelty alone. It was power without accountability. The mobsters in Russia didn't have to worry about police intervention. The cartel members in Mexico didn't have to worry about witnesses or investigations or punishment. They operated in environments where the rule of law was either weak, compromised, or non-existent. That's a terrifying thing to truly understand. In places where the rule of law functions, even imperfectly, bad people still have to pause. They have to calculate risk. They have to consider consequences. They might still do terrible things, but they do them knowing there's a chance they'll be caught, punished, exposed. In places like the ones these girls came from, that pause doesn't exist. Power answers only to itself. Violence becomes a tool, not an exception, and ordinary families get caught in the middle, forced to make choices no one should ever have to make. Growing up in the United States, I didn't realize how much that invisible structure mattered. It's easy to complain about corruption, about injustice, about systems that fail people, and those complaints are valid. Bad things absolutely happen here. Innocent people suffer. Violence exists everywhere. But there is still, at least in theory, a line. A line that says you can't openly murder a family for refusing to sell a business. A line that says you can't stop a car, pull out a teenager, and execute him without at least trying to hide it. That line doesn't always hold. Sometimes it breaks. But the fact that it exists at all changes everything. For those two girls, that line didn't exist where they came from. They grew up knowing that safety wasn't guaranteed by law, only by luck. That survival sometimes meant leaving everything behind or sacrificing someone you love. That justice wasn't something you could count on showing up afterward. What's strange is how normal they seemed. They laughed, they made friends, They worried about exams. They argued with teachers. They blended in so well that most people never realized the kind of realities they had escaped. Trauma doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind a polite smile or a quiet personality. Sometimes it sits at a desk next to you in math class. Looking back now as an adult, those stories haunt me more than any ghost story ever could. Not because they involve blood or horror in a cinematic sense, but because they're real. Because people are still living like that right now, making those kinds of choices, losing loved ones to forces that don't care. It also changed how I think about fear. Fear in those stories isn't screaming or panic. It's calm. It's efficient. It's a father deciding to abandon his life to save his children. It's a 16-year-old telling his family to drive away. It's people understanding instantly what the stakes are. There's something deeply unsettling about that level of clarity. I don't think I fully appreciated what it meant to live in a place where the rule of law, however flawed, still exists until I heard those stories. It's not about pretending one country is perfect and others are not. It's about understanding how quickly everything changes when power goes unchecked, when bad people don't have to look over their shoulder, when violence doesn't trigger response, when survival depends not on rights, but on timing and obedience. Those two girls didn't ask to be born into those circumstances. They didn't choose to be asylum seekers. They were just kids whose families made impossible choices so they could live. That's what stays with me. Not the violence itself, but the fact that they carried it so quietly. That they sat in classrooms in a new country, learning a new language, building new lives, while holding memories that would shake most adults to their core. It's freaky, yes. But more than that, it's sobering. It's a reminder that the things we take for granted, laws, consequences, protection, aren't universal. And when they disappear, what replaces them is something far colder and far more unforgiving. In America, bad things happen. But bad people still have to think. In a lot of places, they don't. And that difference is everything. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.